we're firmly in the realm of EcoDharma with this. And there are a lot of caveats when it comes to EcoDharma. Because I feel on fairly solid ground talking about meditation. There's thousands of years of teaching and practice and experimentation, and then, I've had the benefit of sitting with some really good teachers and learning through my own experience, and then watching how it affects people. So I feel like I'm fairly solid ground with saying, oh yeah, well, do this or try that, or nobody knows what the right way to do the crises that we're facing on this planet right now. We don't know how to do this. We really don't. There's no right way to deal with it. But the thing that I always go to, that I start with for myself, is that, the planet will be fine. This is not about the planet. The planet's been here for 5 billion years, maybe 6. And this is just a blip. There's been 5 mass extinction events before the one that we're causing right now. The last one was 66 million years ago. It was a giant asteroid. And it killed, they estimate, 98% of the living things on Earth, including all the dinosaurs. All the dinosaur movies, they're CGI. They don't exist. If anybody was wondering, they all died. It was quite dramatic, and what happened was mammals and then us, and that's only 66 million years, which is a lot, but it's nothing over 5 billion. In other words, this is what the Earth does. Whatever we do to it, if we blow up every thermonuclear device, and there's huge amounts of radiation, it all has half-lives. There's lots of natural radiation that comes from inside the Earth, and lots of radiation that used to come from the sun before there was an atmosphere. And the Earth figured all that out, and it'll figure this out too. So don't worry about the Earth. People say, oh, we have to save the planet. No. We may be concerned about saving ourselves. That's cool. Or the whales, or all the critters that we love, or the ecosystems that we love. That's worthy of our concern, but not the planet. So take that off your conscience. We are the planet. This is what the planet is doing right now, is us. Evolution is a series of experiments. It's trial and error. And it's completely impermanent. All of evolution is it's all pure anicca. It's pure impermanence. It's pure motion. And we are the result of that. And for better or worse, what was the quote? I'm not good with quotes. Anyway, our emotional intelligence is like a child, and our technology is like gods and goddesses. And we can see the result. There's a lot of greed, there's a lot of ill will, and there's a lot of delusion in the world, and it's hooked up to incredible technology. It's just leveraged by so much power of technology. And what do we do with it? We figure out more and more powerful ways of killing people and destroying ecosystems and making life miserable for most people. it's pathetic, but it's where we're at. It's the sum total of where we're at. Now, each of us in this room, we would say, well, if I was in charge of the world, I'd do a better job. And that might be true. I mean, maybe we're somewhat more evolved. But the sum total of what humanity is doing right now is the sum total of where humanity is at. That's where we've made it on an evolutionary level. And if we don't make it, then it's not our fault. It wasn't the dinosaurs' fault that they didn't make it. It was just the way it went down. And if we don't make it, what we're doing to ourselves in a way is just as natural. It's just as much a result of evolution as an asteroid. Which doesn't mean that we shouldn't do our best in the meantime. Because trying to do our best is also that same evolutionary force. And it doesn't mean that any of us has the slightest idea what's going to happen or what the result of our actions is going to be. One of the deepest principles of Zen is don't know mind. We don't really know. All we have is what comes through our senses and what's interpreted by our minds. Everything that comes through our senses is filtered, and then it's interpreted by our minds. So in a very real sense, and it's really powerful to realize this in your own experience, the world doesn't exist objectively in the way that we experience it. It's just our perception of the world. There is no world the way that we perceive it. We share the world with so many different life forms. And each of those life forms has its own sensory apparatus and its own mind and perceives the world through that and lives in a very different world. And our world isn't any more real than an ant's world. But in ant's world, a blade of grass to an ant is like a skyscraper. And they don't see the way we see. I'm not sure that we've figured out how ants see. If you watch them walk around, it doesn't look like it doesn't look like they can see at all. Really, they just bump into stuff. But they're obviously perceiving the world in their own way. The world to an ant is a totally different world. There's no objective reason to say that their world isn't right and ours is the right world. Does that make sense? It's and each of us interprets the world and sees the world differently. They did these experiments. This is really interesting. So they contacted, I don't remember if it was in New Guinea or in Brazil, but this very isolated tribe that had never experienced modern civilization. And so they showed them pictures of modern stuff, like cars or airplanes or toasters, whatever, modern stuff that, if I hold this up, everybody knows what this is, right? There's no mystery, right? Well, they couldn't see it in the picture. They couldn't see the picture of the things that we readily recognize because their brains didn't know how to rectify it into an object. Because human-made objects were so alien to their brains, to their perception, that they couldn't even see them. Which I've always found kind of interesting. How does, but we're so used to, but if you went into their environment, their tropical rainforest, or there's like thousands of different plants and insects and whatnot, those people can recognize every single one of those. Like when they're little kids, they've learned thousands of plants and thousands of insects and, thousands of colors and shapes that we don't see. And all we would see in there is like, oh, there's a lot of plants. And they would say, do you see that plant? And you'd be like, no, which one? The green one. Which green one? The one that, like, we wouldn't see it. We would just see a lot of green stuff. Because our brains and our minds haven't been trained, haven't been conditioned. So the point is that, what are we talking about with the world? We think we understand the world, but we're basically getting it filtered through media. And at any given moment, there's literally billions of stories happening around the planet. And how many of those are we aware of? Well, we're very aware of our own story, and we're more aware of the people around us, and come into our group, and people share a little bit of each other's story. And then we read the media, wherever you get your news, if you still get news. You get like maybe a dozen stories, or if you're really trying to drink through the fire hose, maybe a few dozen stories. That's not much. So what do we know of the world? We don't really. This is just very abstract, the world. So I'm just trying to underline like this idea of don't know. Like we create a world, we create a sense of knowing out of incredibly incomplete information. Don't know. I know it's not how the Zen people originated it, but just on a very practical 21st century level, what we know is 1/trillionth of what could be known, or 1/trillionth with a couple of hundred extra zeros of what could be known. And do you get it? So, yeah, we don't know what's going to happen. We don't even know what's happening. We really don't know what's happening. We get summaries, We know what the average CO2 level is on the Earth, and we know what it used to be. And that's not that's an ugly graph. That's a scary graph. But there's a lot we don't know. So we have to have a certain amount of humility or perspective in what's happening. I don't think, regardless of what anybody tells you, that there's any correct response to the situation, because one, we're part of evolution, we're part of nature. This is where we are. This is what we're doing. So, how do you judge that? How do you judge that most of humanity prefers Putins and Trumps? People actually prefer that, I know that Putin will rig the election, but he's really popular in Russia. And we don't even want to talk about Mr. T, so, he's really popular here. So it's not like, it's easy to say, well, those people are wrong or they're deluded or whatever, but that's where humanity is at. That's where people are at. That's our current level of evolution. That's what those characters represent. And so we have to see that. We have to put this in perspective. If we don't make it, that's what happened. That's just what happened. And again, I'm not saying that there aren't things that we can do or that you're called to do. And but I don't think that there's anything that anybody should do. I don't think there's a should here. It's really difficult, we all feel responsible or some sense of guilt or implication or, what we should be doing. And it's easy to judge other people. It's really easy. Oh, you should be doing this. You should be doing that. But we don't know. You should get an e-car, but the math says that it takes a lot of miles to justify all the crap that went into that e-car before it offsets all the carbon that you'd be burning in your gas car. And what's it doing to the countries where they mine that stuff? And and et cetera, et cetera. It's really hard. So I think we each of us has to sort out, what's really there for me to do? What's really real for me? Not looking over my shoulder at what other people think or the judgments that they may place or, the peer group decision that this is what we should do. If you feel called to do it, do it. If you have the means and the time and the energy to do it, great. The more that we all do, the better. But what that is, I don't know. I can almost there's no place to stand to make those judgments. There's no place to stand to leverage those judgments because we really don't know the effects of anything. So we each have to trust our own heart, our own intuition in terms of, what's right in this situation? What do we do in this situation? And respect and learn from what other people are doing and how they see it, rather than, judging them. And it doesn't mean that it isn't worth having discussions about what could be done or what you could do or what I could do. But not from a place of, I know what you should be doing and what you're doing is dumb and I'm going to convince you that what I'm doing is better, so you should do it with me. That's, that we have to be beyond that. It's more like, hey, I feel this way about this and that's why I'm doing this, and, how does that resonate for you? As an open question. And offering things, but not guilt-tripping people. Because we don't know. There's so much we don't know. There's a lot of paradox here. And I know that, there's a sense of overwhelm with some people or at some moments. And I think part of that overwhelm is a sense of, I need to figure this out. The mind just feels like, here's this massive problem or set of problems. And my mind in that moment is like, I have to figure this out. I have to know what the solution is. Because that's what minds do. They solve problems. They don't. And we put ourselves under this immense pressure. I have to understand this. I have to solve it. I have to know. And that's why I, used the word humility before. That we have to accept how much we don't know. And we don't need to be overwhelmed by the scope of things, because that isn't our problem. Our problem is, okay, what am I connected to doing right now in front of me? That's my problem. That's a problem or a challenge or a work that you can choose and you can put your energy into it and your time into it. But if you take on the whole thing, that's overwhelm. It's total overwhelm. And if you take it on from a point of view of, I have to succeed, as if we even know what success is. Because we don't know what success is. We don't know. This is a Nietzsche. This is impermanence. There's no finish line. There is no success. We don't, what does that mean even? What's success? That everybody on earth gets enlightened and we all love each other and we live happily ever after. That'd be, okay, I'll vote for that outcome. That sounds great. But but if I really felt like that was, that feels overwhelming. That would stress me out. So the overwhelm is a sign that you're taking on too much. That you need to break this down. And okay, what can I do that I'm really connected to? How can I live my life in a way that's coherent with who I am right now? And do whatever I can do and let the world take care of itself. Because I don't even know what the world is. If you're honest, you don't know what the world is. It's just a concept. It's just an abstraction. It's just a word that we create, and then we give it like, oh, we know what that is because we gave it a name, the world. So, what's going on in the world? I don't. Again, we just have a few data points. We don't really know. So that's where we get overwhelmed. Whatever it is that we do, the quality of the effort and energy and motivation that we put into it can't be the same energy that created the problem without just prolonging the problem. So what we're facing now on this planet is basically separation. This is the illusion of separation, the illusion that we're separate from nature, the illusion that we're separate from each other, the illusion that if we exploit other people and other animals and whole ecosystems, that's our right. And we can do that with impunity and get away with it without any consequences because we're separate, because we're better than, because we deserve it, because we can do it. So the fact that we can do it means that we're allowed to do it. Well, we're allowed to do it, but that it's okay to do it, that there's no consequence. So that's like the understanding that comes from separation. But the truth is that there is no separation. We're all in this together. And when you look at the planet from space, aside from the energy input of the sun, it's a zero-sum game. This is it. This is what we got, So the illusion of separation, when you look at the planet from space, it's really clear. I mean, people have like deep spiritual experiences when they, not all the astronauts. I mean, some of them are, not, but there are enough of the people who've gone up in space and spent time up there looking at the earth, and they see that non-separation. And they see the fragility and the tininess of Earth, even just from orbit, or let alone from the moon, which is even further, but it's not that far. And something happens to them that they see non-separation. They see the fact of it. You can't, when you look at the planet like out in space, one of those photos there, you can't see any separation. You can't see countries and colors and races and economics and, you just see that. But this illusion of separation is what creates the problem. The problems that we face. And that's the evolutionary hurdle, is can we get past that? If we don't get past that, we can't really resolve this. We can't solve it. So, for each of us individually to make a contribution to even just the people around us or the situation around us, or if you're working on a larger scale or more globally or in organizations or whatever, to come into the situation from a place of separation is only going to add to that that lack of understanding. It's not going to change fundamentally what the issue is or what the problems are. So the kind of work that we do here or with meditation or internally, and the way that we interact with other people is essential to doing anything externally. So that, the more that we can see through separation in our own immediate experience, the more that whatever we bring into the world, we're bringing in from a place of love, a place of wisdom, a place of compassion, a place of generosity, rather than a place of judgment and reactivity and anger and fear, which is a lot of the motivational structure of a lot of people who are actually trying to do good stuff, but doing it with that kind of energy makes it very difficult to see how that would change at the root problems that are caused by separation. So working, I guess what we call working on ourselves, that's kind of a broad category, even though in a sense that's kind of violent. It's kind of, but the kind of intention that brings us here together is, in this understanding, essential for the kind of work that you may think needs to be done in the world, or that you want to be part of in the world. Does that make sense? This is tied together. How many of you have ever been around an angry activist who was, on some level saying the stuff that needs to be said, but the energy was very angry or judgmental or defensive? Has anybody ever experienced that? Yeah. Like that doesn't work. It doesn't work. Not to solve problems that are caused by separation. I think it's also really essential that we spend time in nature. Again, the root cause, separation from nature, seeing ourselves, meaning humans, civilization, society, technology, seeing itself as separate from nature, and nature is a resource. We have an extractive understanding of our relationship with nature. And we see where that gets us. You know, it's either a warehouse or a dump. And that's not a good relationship with nature. It's not even, I don't even think it's deep enough to say nature's our home. It's like, that's still separation. You know, you can walk out of your home, right? You can leave your home and come back to your home. You can clean your home, you can leave it a mess. It's actually, nature is what we are. And it's really hard to have that understanding or that experience if we don't get out of our human-made artifact environment. If we don't get out of our cars and our buildings and our roads and our streets and our amusements and, you know, and get like a little bit more exposed, a little bit more just me in the trees or me in the rocks or me in the cold or me in the wet or me in the heat. And be with that long enough to actually realize, let some of that non-separation permeate our experience, our senses, that, oh, when people go on retreat and they do solos, one of the first realizations is, I feel at home. You know, like feeling at home in a way of, I don't feel separate, I feel safe, I feel connected, I feel taken care of, I feel seen, I feel heard. Those are some of the experiences that people commonly relate from just being in nature. And with that comes a sense of gratitude, a sense of love, a sense of awe, a sense of peace, and also a sense of grief or loss at what we're doing. But it comes within that. It's not just fear and grief and loss, but there's also love and connection. And we need that. We need that. Humans have never been this separate from nature in the way that we live until a couple of hundred years ago, really, a few hundred years ago, out of hundreds of thousands of years of human evolution and millions of years of mammalian evolution. Like, we're not built for that. We're not built to never see the sky, because during the day it's covered with buildings and pollution, and at night it's covered with, light, so you can't see the night sky. Most humans don't see the night sky anymore who live in cities, and that's most humans. And I think that messes with us in a bad way. Like, contemplating the night sky just kind of blows our minds a little bit. Because, if this is the world, this little planet, right, with our couple of billion stories, and what's that? I mean, that's like way bigger than this. So whatever it is we're called to do, I feel like we need to make sure that it's informed and nourished by real connection with, for lack of a better word, what we call nature, even though using the word nature implies that there's something that's not nature. Right? What's not nature? It's all nature. We're nature. Everything's made of the same 106 elements. Is that the right number?
I think it's 112 or 14, but a lot of them are very
They're not natural.
short durations. Yeah.
They're not natural.
92 or so.
No, that's true, yeah.
Okay, well, the number keeps rising because they're creating them unnaturally in giant machines for microseconds. But anyway, everything's composed of the same stuff. And I mean, if we want to go into non-duality, which I'm not sure we want to go down that rabbit hole, that stuff isn't even really stuff, because when you finally try to find the stuff in it, there is none. It's just energy. There is no stuff. But that's a whole different discussion. For the point of view of this discussion, there's stuff. There's a planet, there's humans, there's animals, there's critters, there's an atmosphere. And that, that's what we're trying to deal with. But it's not separate from our Dharma practice or our spiritual practice or our understanding of that. I don't think any of the issues that we face or that we see are separate from any of the other issues that we face. It's all, if you start pulling on the web in one place, you can see it's all connected. A lot of the political turmoil, a lot of the wars that we see going on, there's underlying environmental stress in those places. There's a lot of desertification going on in North Africa, the Middle East, in parts of Asia, the American Southwest, South America, and a lot of rural economies are collapsing, creating huge amounts of refugees. People can't grow food. Maybe they can make drugs, or they can grow coca, or poppies, but they can't grow food. This stuff's all connected. And very few people want to talk about that, but there's a lot of underlying environmental stress that's starting to happen around the world that's causing what then we see on the surface is civil wars or dictators or invasions, that it looks like, oh, that's just what they're doing, but you can't see the underlying economic collapse or environmental collapse that's driving it. And that's often not reported. But it's, if you look at it, it's there. It's there in North Africa, it's there in Syria, it's there in a lot of places. It's there in South America. And that kind of stuff is like, it's all connected. So maybe it's a helpful, maybe it could be helpful with the overwhelm, like, okay, it's one problem. It's 10,000 problems, but it's one problem. It's basically where people are at, where humanity's at, where we've evolved to, how much of our civilization and individual humans are motivated by greed, motivated by ill will, motivated by delusion. And is it even remotely possible to solve or resolve any of this without more of that turning into love or wisdom or compassion or generosity? The paradox is that each of us has that. It's actually, our Buddha nature, or our nature, or the nature of consciousness is love. It's not greed, ill will, and delusion. That's conditioned. That's conditioned by the mind. It's conditioned by our parents. It's conditioned by our society. It's conditioned by other people. It's learned. It's not our nature. It's easily learned, but it's not our ultimate nature. But if it's not our ultimate nature, then it's reachable. Our ultimate nature is reachable. And to me, how to connect that is really the work. That's really the job. That's really the challenge, is how does that get connected? How do people get reconnected to their nature? But the first step is, like, before, one of the helpful things for people to reconnect to that part of themselves is if somebody else sees them that way. If we all see each other as separate, if we all see each other as the other, then we're all sort of reinforcing that in each other's experience. We're all just things to each other. That's how our culture operates. We're all just, I hate it when like somewhere in the 70s or whenever, like all of a sudden humans became consumers. Like when did they do that to us? They turned us into consumers. We used to be human beings and citizens, Now we're consumers. It's just like, all you are is this garbage can that they're going to try to put stuff into. And, that's like a really awful way to relate to other human beings. Like, we're all just functions. And just by interacting with people, meeting people as loving beings, as non-separate, having the same nature as us is revolutionary. That's transformative. In whatever realm of interaction, in whatever realm of what we're doing, whether it's trivial at the grocery store, or your partner, or people you work with, or whatever, seeing people that way is powerful. Because most of us don't get seen that way since we were like little babies. We see most of us, like if we're open, we see little babies that way. But by the time we're adults, it's like we've lost that. It can be actually really interesting to look at anybody who you really don't like and see them as a baby. See them as a little kid. It's like they just want to be loved, and they just love. It's simple. It's not complicated. We all have that. We still have that. And I don't mean this in some dumb, sentimental, new age, vacuous way. I mean it. This is real. That is the only power that can solve this. If it would ever get solved. Whatever that means, because I don't know what it means, and none of us know what it means. Because we're dealing with impermanence, we're dealing with anicca, so there is no finish line. But whatever progress we're going to make on this planet as human beings, it's going to come from love. It's not going to come from technology. It's not going to come from space people. It's going to come from love. So I'll leave it there. Yeah, I'll leave it there. We can move into a discussion, question. You can dispute anything I said. It's all indefensible. Oh, Mr. T. Look.
Not necessarily just Trump, but thinking of people who comment on local news articles, and you just get so mad, and I don't know, how do you bring the loving?
No, well, imagine them as a baby. I mean, I'm sure that by the time he was 6, he was awful, but because he never got any love. He got no love. That poor guy. I mean, no love, no joy, no play. I mean, you wouldn't want to do that to anybody. But, to do it to somebody to make him president, that's nuts. But you don't want to do that to people. It's too cruel. No, but as a little baby, as a 6-month-old, so that's one way. Just imagine, at 6 months old. But when we get into the non-duality piece in March, the direct path piece, we're going to start to go into our own being. That place that is just pure love or pure awareness. Because they're basically two sides of the same coin. And start to experience and realize like that awareness or that love is not personal. It's not yours. It just is. Meaning, it's our shared being. It's our shared being. It's not mine, it's not yours. It's not just the 14 of us. It's all. So at that point, there is no separation. Everything that's coming out of people's behavior is just conditioning, but that's not who they are. So you start to understand like the underlying, even him, the underlying, we're all that same consciousness. So you can radically dislike or disapprove of somebody's behavior, their actions, their words, their impact, their understanding, and still love them. And if anybody can get close to him and actually still love him, you know, and he could take that in a little bit, that would be the best thing that could ever happen.
Dharma friend who keeps a picture of him as a baby on her phone as practice when she really got so activated by the last few years and took that on as a practice.
You know, traditional Brahma-Vihara practice, like metta, like you send metta to beings that you love, right? The easy one. Then you send metta to people that are neutral. Like whoever, you know, the next easy one. And then, first you start with yourself, which can be the hardest, but, because we're all so hard on ourselves, but it's really important to be able to send metta to yourself. So that's where we start. We send metta to ourselves. Then we start with people, then we go to people that or beings, you know, it could be pets or whatever, like that we easily love. Then we go to neutral, you know, the class, you know, when they teach the person who at the post office, but nobody goes to the post office anymore. So, you know, it's your Amazon delivery person. and then the fourth is who you really dislike. Just, you know, that's who you really dislike. And you try to work with the difficult person. And because love, this understanding of love, it's impersonal. It's not personal. This isn't romantic love. That's different. This is impersonal love. When we're connected to metta, when we're connected to that heart, to our nature, then nobody has to deserve or earn that love. It's totally impersonal.
John, may I say, I'm sorry, Johann. Okay, how far do you take that when you are up against situations where there is a great deal of threat and danger? And what do you do with love? How do you maintain that? Or do you have a right to protect yourself?
Oh, absolutely. This has nothing to do with behavior.
It has nothing to do with behavior.
No. It's not like, you know, we've seen it with people like Gandhi. You know, we've seen it with the Dalai Lama, with the Chinese. You know, he says, my friend's the enemy. That's what he calls the Chinese. My friend's the enemy. The friends is the love part. He loves them. But they're the enemy. And he will do everything he can to change what they're doing, non-violently. he hasn't been that effective, but that's not because he hasn't tried or he doesn't have that motivation. It's just, he's up against the Chinese. It's a few million Tibetans against 1 billion Chinese or whatever. Like, it's, the odds aren't good. They have nuclear weapons. So, but he would do anything to stop what they're doing to Tibet. So, but he would do it with love. But it might be, powerful or forceful. From the point of view of the Dalai Lama, it wouldn't be violent. But
Very few of us are the Dalai Lama, though.
well,
So what do we do then?
well, we do our best.
We do our best.
We do our best. We do our best. Yeah, it's not to say like don't go out, don't
I
like
understand what
don't
you're
go
saying.
out and try to change the election from a place of hate. Go out and do it from a place of compassion if you can. Because that will actually change more votes. Because when you meet people with compassion, I mean, you meet people with you're wrong and I'm right, how many votes are you going to change with that? But if you meet people with compassion and you hear what they're, where they're freaked out and where they feel like hopeless and lost and nobody can hear me, and maybe they think that guy is hearing them, and you hear them, you meet them with compassion and love, you might actually get through.
I have a little easier time with the idea of compassion than I do of love. It's
It's
hard to think about loving Hitler. But can I have compassion for him? I think that feels a little bit more reachable.
it's just words. Don't get too hung up on the words. Compassion might be a better word for what we're talking
And I
about.
understand the love you're talking about is not the kind of personal love I feel for people I love.
Right.
It's not that. It's something more or bigger or
It's
less
compassion,
emotional.
compassion, generosity, forgiveness. I call them flavors of love. Like if you take light and you put it through a prism and you get all these colors, you take love, you put it through a prism, you get compassion, generosity, forgiveness, metta. You get all these flavors or all these. So they're all totally valid. So whichever one, if you've got to work with white light, great. But if you can only work with red light or violet light or green light, it's fine. It's totally cool. It's still light. It's still a flavor of love. So that's totally fine.
I think somewhere where I struggle is just my mom with it this weekend. She just left this morning after a few nights, and she doesn't come out much at all. And I did really well. I've been down to Texas like 4 times in the last 7 months, and it was always like hung on something, so I could kind of get behind that. But when she was just here in my space, like we talk here about love, but I was just aggravated, and she and I grew up with anger with her, and that's kind of how we interact, and it's hard to I like this idea, but like in real life, I mean, I thought she was gonna leave Saturday morning. She stuck around, but somebody kind of came over and fell on the grenade, And I'm just like, I like this idea of love and compassion, but me executing on it, I wasn't my best self this weekend.
Yeah. Well, it also includes love and compassion for yourself.
What does
And
that mean?
well, it means like that you can only handle so much, and you need your own space and you need your own boundaries, and if it's more than you can deal with, then how do you give yourself the love and compassion to take care of yourself so that you don't get overwhelmed by your mom. In other words, like, it isn't just an internal, this is a balance of the external and the internal, you know? So where you are right now, you can only stay open with her for so much. And knowing that and recognizing that and giving yourself permission to have that is compassion for yourself.
Makes sense.
You know? Like, we can only do what we can do. You know, and you could say, well, I should be able to, whatever. But the should, you know, there's no shoulds here. It is what it is. So, you know, what a long time ago, Ram Dass said, he told this story, like he was in India for a really long time, and he was pretty, like, lit up. And he went to New York to, like, spend some time with his parents from India, and it was a total shit show. And he said, you know, if you think you're enlightened, spend some time with your family. It's hard. So that's what I mean by giving yourself compassion and, you know, honoring your own boundaries. And it's hard. It's really hard. It's hard to tell your mom to go home. You know? Because, you know, her retort is, I took care of you for, like, you know, how many years? You can put up with me for another day. And she's right, but, you know, it's a tough one.
Yeah, we finally had a calm moment. I think it was last night. You know, just remembering all day, and it's just calm and quiet, and we're still just so stirred up by all of our earlier interactions. And I couldn't quite feel it, and I want to feel it because, you know, it's pretty. It is rare for her to be here. I'll keep all that in mind.
Do you have any recommendations, or like, is it even possible to, I guess it strikes me that there's like so many scales of like time and perspective, and because our life is at the scale that we're used to living, like that's just where our heads are stuck in, like almost all the time. You kind of talk about this broader picture of like the scale of the world and how long the world's been around and all of that. And like it makes sense sort of like intellectually when I hear you say it, but to like remember that on a moment to moment basis is like, I just don't know how to do that.
It's hard.
Yeah.
And it's hard because I think it's harder because we don't live in nature. We live so separate from nature. Because, you know, if we're actually out looking at stars and the ground and trees and rocks, then that scale is, you know, rivers, that scale is more apparent. But, I mean, we're bopping around Boulder. Most of what we're looking at in Boulder is within the past few years was built. And it's ugly. And I'm not happy about it.
Just look at the Flatirons.
I know, exactly. We need to look at the Flatirons. But they keep building stuff that blocks our view of the Flatirons. That's part of the problem. Yeah, they just built a factory in the open space across the street from my house. It's like, so, I think that's part of the problem, because this is, what we're taking in through our senses is different than what we're thinking about. It's really hard to think about it, like think ourselves into it. When people boat in like the Grand Canyon or the canyons in the Southwest, and they see, 800 million years of rock right in front of your eyes.
2 billion.
Yeah, when you get further down, you see billions of years of rock. It's like that has an impact like deep within us, a deep resonance within us. That, but we're driving around on roads full of potholes with new apartment buildings all over the place. It has a whole different impact on our consciousness. So it's hard. I feel like being in nature really helps. And, maybe like if you read science, I think reading certain kinds of science really helps for people whose minds are interested in that, because that can give the perspective too, if you want a bigger perspective. But also like art from people who have that perspective, music from people that have that perspective, transmits it also.
Last October, we went to Mesa Verde to see the annular eclipse, to see the Ring of Fire. And in the evening, at night, we went away from the lights of Farview Lodge and saw the true dark sky. And it's a designated dark sky area. And if any of you haven't seen that for a while, I can't recommend anything higher than that. It's an amazing experience to see our familiar constellations. You can't even see them because there are so many stars around those stars. It's just an amazing, amazing experience. So I highly recommend it. It's not that far away.
I remember seeing the Milky Way for the first time and going, oh,
Yeah.
that's why they call it that.
Yeah.
It is that. It's not just a candy bar.
You can actually see the Milky Way while it's still a little bit of light in the sky, and then as it gets darker, then just all the stars come out. It's just extraordinary. And that sense of how very small we are. It's humbling and wonderful.
Yeah. And I just feel like we need that. Like we need that sensory input to keep ourselves grounded and in perspective of what we are and who we are.
Maybe biologically too. I mean, we're probably all of our circadian rhythms. And I was really struck by what you said. I've never thought about how most people on Earth now are living in cities and never see the night sky. That really surprised me. It made sense when you said it, because I never thought about it. It feels tragic.
Yeah. But, when you think about it, it's not just, it's like a lot of things, not just the night sky, but how many people see a river that actually has natural riverbanks and does its flooding and its, annual expansion and contraction and actually is alive as a river? Because mostly people see rivers with concrete and bridges and buildings, and it's barely, it just looks so, it's like the difference between having a hamster and seeing a wild animal.
A lot of places are just totally filled with plastic too.
Yeah.
Southeast Asia and a lot of countries, which is. You showed me that YouTube a while back, where a lot of that efforts being made to clean up the plastic out of rivers in certain parts of the world, but particularly in Asia, and it's just stunning to see the just amount of plastic trash, and of course tied to poverty and all kinds of things.
Yeah.
Like you were saying, it's all part of the same problem.
Anything else?
I have one question, but it might be, like the dinosaurs, if there was an asteroid, it went fast, right? But with what could be ahead for us, is like, it just be like a slow attrition, painful and slow, and that's the part that really disturbs me. Lack of water,
We don't know.
No? Okay. That's
Yeah.
that's
I mean,
sad.
a big nuclear exchange could take 30 minutes.
Yeah.
We don't know what's going to happen. I mean, that's on the table. That's definitely on the table. The quick and
The Vulcans could come.
the Borg. The Borg is actually really interesting because that is non-separation. I mean, the whole thing with the Borg is like, we are the Borg. You will be assimilated. Resistance is futile.
It's actually a Borg.
Sounds like good news.
Yeah. No, it's a really interesting thing. I mean,
Direct path.
yeah, it's like, what's so bad about being assimilated and being, like non-separate? I mean, why not? I mean, they looked really crappy, but they didn't look crappy to themselves. They probably looked beautiful to each other. Anyway. Yeah, we are the Buddhists. You will be assimilated. Resistance is futile.
We're on to something.
Infiltrated the church.
Okay, this last part needs to be taken off the tape. You don't want to put this out in cyberspace.
I'll ask Mike.